Good morning, guys. So before we jump into wonder, let me just, I'm going to answer three questions. I get asked three questions usually all the time. First of all is, how did I get where I'm at? Second of all is, what do I actually do? And then third of all is, did we really land on the moon? So I'm going to very quickly answer two of those questions. So what is my journey? How did I get here? Well, I started at NDSU, graduated with mechanical engineering, and then I went straight into consulting in aerospace and defense. In 2015, I applied to be an astronaut with NASA and their astronaut candidacy program. I went through that entire process, and while I was going through that process, I got the opportunity to work on NASA's Orion spacecraft, which is going to be going to Mars eventually. I left that program and I went and worked at Sierra Nevada Space Corporation. They're making a brand new spacecraft called Dream Chaser, which is going to go to the International Space Station. So my time there was done, and right now I'm in the Human Exploration Division of NASA, which includes the International Space Station and the mission to Mars. So what do I actually do? I get asked that all the time. And so it's kind of a complicated question because it depends on where I'm at and what day it is, honestly. But if I was to say, what is my job in a nutshell, it would be to translate theory into reality. So we know all the math. We got that covered. We got math covered. The problem is, how do we make that a reality? And it takes a whole lot of wondering and a whole lot of creativity to get that done. And I'll go through some examples with you guys. So wonder is the beginning of wisdom. And I'll be honest with you, when I first started thinking about this, I really was struggling a little bit of, okay, well, how do you talk about wonder? What is wonder, right? But the more you start thinking about it, the more you realize how powerful it is, right? Everything that you've done in life, that I've done in life anyway, started with wonder, right? And I'm sure you guys can relate to that. It doesn't, depending on your job, depending on what you went to school for, depending on what your hobbies are, depending on where you live, all of it probably started with you wondering about something. So wonder is such a very powerful thing, and it's free, which is good. It doesn't require any electronics. You can sit in the corner and you can wonder all you want all day long. It also is translates between countries. I've had the chance to work with in Japan and China with their space agencies, and believe it or not, no matter how different their culture is, no matter what language they speak, they all wonder the same things. So, what is NASA wondering about? Well, we've been wondering for a long time, how do we get to Mars? So I'll talk a little bit about how we're going to get to Mars and the creativity that's involved in getting to Mars. And we'll start with the Apollo program. And believe it or not, that was 50 years ago. So 50 years ago, the Apollo program was the program that took us to the moon. And right after we went to the moon, we thought, well, what are we going to do next? What's the next project? And they thought, let's go to Mars, right? We've been thinking about it forever. Let's do it. What they were hoping is that they could take what they have, the knowledge that they gained from going to the moon, and translate that to going to Mars. It didn't quite work out that way. So to give you an example, to go from the Earth to moon is about 240,000 miles. It takes about 3 days there and 3 days back. So we thought, okay, sure, we can use the exact same profile. We have the technology, let's go. Well, when they started thinking about it, they kind of got a rude awakening. And they said, well, how do we send humans to Mars? What is the distance from the Earth to Mars? Well, when obviously Earth and Mars, they have different orbits, or they're both orbiting the sun within different orbits. When they're closest together of those orbits, they're about 35 million miles away. Because of the way that orbital mechanics works, the actual trajectory distance to go to Mars from Earth is about 340 million miles. So you compare that to the 200,000 miles that it took us to go to the moon, and you have a big difference. So depending on when we leave, where the planets are, it would take us 6 to 9 months to get there, versus 3 days that it took to get to the moon. So they did some thinking, and the first thing they thought of is, we're going to need a bigger boat. So not only are we going to need a bigger boat, but we have no knowledge in how to live in space, how to work in space. We have very little knowledge of what is the effect on the body, on your mental health of being in space for that long. So before they did anything and said, we're not even going to concentrate on going to Mars, we're going to focus on those two things first. We're going to focus on how can we build a spacecraft big enough to get there, and how are we going to study things before we send them. So what was their answer? I wonder how we can learn and live and work in space, was the space station. So the very first concept they came up with the space station, they were going to build a space station. Of course, they picked the most American name that they possibly could, and they named it the Freedom Station. The problem with the Freedom Station was it was too complicated and cost way too much money. So they got with some of the other agencies around the world and said, well, why don't we all go in together and we'll build one big space station. Since we're all in all of this together, let's build it all in one. And that ended up being the International Space Station that is up in orbit right now. So then the wondering continued. I wonder how we're going to build this thing. We've never put anything up in space nearly this big before. How are we going to get it there? This is how. So they decided, well, using creativity, we have to design this thing to be in separate modules, and then we'll take them all up to the International Space Station at once, or in different flights. And once we get up there, once we get into orbit, we'll go ahead and we'll put them all together, and hopefully everything works. But the question was, how are we going to get it there? We have no spacecraft to take those there. So the answer was the Space Shuttle. The Space Shuttle was designed specifically to bring components up to Earth's orbit, deliver them, and assemble everything for the space station so that we can learn how to live and work in space. So in 50 years, that's how far we've gotten. It doesn't seem like much. But when we consider what they designed in the Space Shuttle and the International Space Station, are two of the most complex and expensive things that we've ever endeavored to do in the world. They ran into a lot of issues designing them because they had no idea what they were doing, to be honest with you. They had no idea what the problems were going to be that came up during the thing. When we go into the design process, there's two different modes. One is we know all the problems straight up. It's easy. We solve the problems. The design is complete. The other one's called a diverging solution. What a diverging solution is we don't know what all the problems are. We're going to try and solve as many as we can to begin with, but ultimately, we don't know what the problems are, and we know that solving some of those problems are going to create even more problems. So what was the result of all this? So the Space Shuttle was first flown in 1981. There was 135 total launches. 33 of them were dedicated solely to building the space station, and it was retired in 2011. With the International Space Station, construction began in 1998. It was finished in 2010, and it's been continuously occupied since 2001. So we've had astronauts up at the space station every day since 2001. It's also insured, believe it or not, by Lloyd's of London. Lloyd's of London put a value on it of $150 billion. So the question is, I still wonder how we're going to go to Mars. Here's how. So right now, we are in phase 0 of going to Mars. We still have all of this left to cover. We still have all of this left to cover. So in 50 years, we've made it to phase 0, and we're just about ready to cross into phase 1. Phase 1 will involve us going back to the moon. So we're working on spacecrafts and habitats to go back to the moon. Phase 2 will go beyond the moon, and then phase 3 and 4 will finally take us to Mars. We have no idea how long it's going to take. We have so many, there's a lot of problems that we don't know are going to come up. There's a lot of problems that we don't know how we're going to solve yet. And there's a lot of technology that we need that doesn't exist yet. So from looking at this from a perspective of creativity, how does creativity work into all of this? Like I said at the beginning, we know all the equations. We know we can do that all day. What we need to do is translate that from theory to application. And we need thinkers. We need creativity. We need people to step outside of the box and say, I don't care what we've done before. Let's look at what we're doing in the future. Let's look at some new ideas. We need fresh new ideas of how to do these things. Here is just another complicated graphic, but it's showing all of the different main systems that we need to go to Mars. So we already have the International Space Station. I talked a little bit about Orion. That's the spacecraft that we're going to take there. We have a new rocket that we're developing called SLS. It's going to be the most powerful rocket ever built. We have space habitats that we're doing studies on of how to get people to space. And can we do research on the ground here to see how long that they can stand in one habitat at one time? We have orbiters. We have landers. We're sending robots all over the place. And ultimately, we're going to have to design a spacecraft that can take us to Mars. So this is one of the primary focuses of NASA. And again, it goes back to the wondering of 50 years ago of, well, I wonder how we're going to send people to Mars. And if we ever lose sight of going to Mars, we always have, that is Buzz Aldrin, by the way, who was the second man to land on the moon. He tells everybody that we need to get our ass to Mars. So if we ever forget, he's always there to remind us. So with that, I know I went through that really fast. That's 50 years of NASA, 50 years of hard work, and thousands of people that I just went through in about 10 minutes. But I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to ask any questions, if you have any questions, or...
Yeah. Well, can I get this on? We good? We have a microphone coming around here. Let's give it up for Derek here really quick. Or wait.